now get a little bit more into the meat of the issue in terms of the actual topic of beyond tzedakah, understanding the Torah expenditure. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain first what I mean by the Torah expenditure. In economics, they talk about how people use their money. Consumption, savings, investment. What I was saying is, and every one of these methods of using money have a different system or different methodology how a person makes a decision. In a Torah expenditure, what you're saying is that there are certain decisions in how we use our money that is defined by Torah. And since it's defined by Torah, it's like it's telling, the Torah tells you have to spend money this way. Excuse me. Okay. So the point is that when you see tzedakah as part of this greater picture of the Torah giving you direction on how you spend your money, it takes on a different tone, different perspective. And what I really was trying to do with the introduction is to broaden our perspective last few shurim, on how we spend money for mitzvot, okay, or when the Torah directs us in how we spend money. See, when people think in terms of tzedakah, they think of it in terms of helping out someone else. I have, I want to help someone else, and their emotion is emotion of chesed, which is the emotion of caring for others, which human beings have. Recently, CNN puts a whole flood of pictures of Haiti up there, and everyone, I want to give. I feel bad for them. I want to give. The point is that in that giving, I'm not taking away from this. I'm not trying to give an idea that I'm taking away from this, but I want to give it a perspective from a psychological perspective. Is people are driven to give, and they actually feel a satisfaction when they give. Okay, so there's this concept that people sometimes say, we hear this line, it's better to give than to receive. Well, to a lot of people what that means is you have a better feeling when you give than when you receive in certain things. It actually feels better when you're helping out others than when you're doing yourself. But the truth is, it's just looking at it as a drive that you're satisfying. And every time you have a drive that you're going to satisfy, you have to be somewhat careful about looking at it. It's not just what we would call the drives that are more associated with what we would call taivas, animalistic desires. You eat in order to satisfy, so you feel full, because being in hunger is a painful situation. The fact is, we look at it and say, well, you see that's problematic. That can lead to averas, lead to sins. The point is that really also that drive to eat can also lead to mitzvahs. Right? The fact of the matter is mitzvahs. We have a concept of mitzvah. Let's say the hiddur mitzvah of achilas matzvah is to eat it while you're hungry. Right? That also satisfies your desire. So the truth is, that desire itself is not a negative thing. Same way with chesed. If chesed is your only desire, is a desire like an emotion, you have to be careful that it's not solely satisfying that drive. And what happens to a lot of people when they give tzedakah or any type of expenditure, their one drive that they focus on is this drive of, I'm helping someone else out, which in many ways you touch them, to try and better to give than to receive, to feel good from doing this, is to have some kind of emotion. Okay? Or sometimes there's also guilting them, things of that nature. The point is that's not the only drive that's involved in looking at this whole structure of how we give funds and how we spend funds and communal ideas. If you only see that drive, then you're misunderstanding what's really going on. You're misreading what your motivation should be. Um, in addition to that, if that's your only drive, there also can be a problem with it, because if you only try to satisfy that drive can also yield negative conclusions. There's a article I wrote, and it's on the Nishma website. And those watching on KosherTube, there's a link to the Nishma website right there in the homepage of KosherTube. If you go there, you look for an article called "The Evil of Chesed," and it deals with the problems with how Chesed can actually lead to Averas. I mean, the essential statement is by the Arias. It says by one of the Arias, it says Chesed he, that this act of incest is a Chesed. Okay, so there's a whole discussion of why is the term Chesed there used, and it indicates that Chesed can also be used. You have to be very careful about Chesed, in the sense that it's not anything that's a Chesed is not always a good drive. And with Chesed, you have to be careful. Like, for example, if your drive is to give, in many ways it also subjugates the other. Because what happens is you develop an ego of giving, and you don't give the other person the chance to have his own self-respect in terms of being able to reciprocate. I remember one person was saying, I always have Orchim over. I never go to anyone's house. I only have Orchim over to my house. Fact is those people you're inviting over, one of two things. Either you're creating individuals who are constantly only taking, and they don't know how to give back, they're always taking. Or more importantly, what you're doing is you're creating a situation of inequality where you're always the giving. And the guy wants to say, listen, I want to invite you back. I want to be a mensch also. I want to have a certain sense of connection. The point is you have to be careful about those type of things. Also, you have to be careful because with that feeling of chesed, so you have to be careful because it also can lead to a certain level of gaiva, because the person is always feeling I'm such a great person because I give. The fact of the matter is just a lot of issues in that. But the point is what I wanted to do with a lot of things in terms of my instruction is to explain that there were a lot of other drives that are involved in how we are to make decisions with our money from a Torah perspective in terms of how we spend money for Torah purposes. So one of them flows from the sense of our own responsibility to self, which also connects to an aspect of self-respect. And in the article, which is available also on the website Beyond Tzedakah, I point out, I actually in the middle I start talking about a concept called Sonu Matonis, a few pages in. Sonu Matonis Yechya, the one who hates gifts will live. And the concept, the first one of the aspects of the concept is that you have a certain responsibility for yourself and for what you have benefited from, in the sense that when you have an aspect of working and developing the world, the point is that you should want to carry your own weight, and that should be a motivation. So the classic case of this is the Gemara Chulin. I think it's Chulin 7b, the story of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer, who never received a gift. Now, there's a whole issue that he was invited by Rabbi over for a meal, and Rabbi was very happy because Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer agreed to come to his place for a meal. The fact of the matter is that the Gemara there, I think another Gemara later, talks about the fact that going to a meal is not totally a matana. You're not just receiving, because the person who invites you wants to have you there. You're actually giving back. It's actually reciprocal because the person is happy to have you there. You're actually honoring them with your presence. So the point is when you go to meals, a lot of times you invite friends over, it's not really on one hand it's a matana, but it doesn't apply to the whole concept because it's much more reciprocal. I mean, we'll talk about Tzonu Matonis in a second, what the concerns are. But Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer never took a gift from anyone. Rabbi invited him over to his house for a meal, and Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer agreed to it. And Rabbi was ecstatic. So he was so privileged, felt so honored that Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoyer was coming to his house. And because his Gemara says over there, says, "What are you shocked about? What do you think? I've made a neder not to benefit from any Israel. Chas v'shalom, Israel and Kedoshim. I for sure want to be, it's a mitzvah to benefit from the Israel. So forth, but I'm careful. Now, the reason people are careful is because you want to make sure that the person who's giving to you is giving with a full heart, not that he sort of feels he has to and begrudgingly giving to you. The other thing is you also want to make sure that the person giving to you can afford to give to you, right? So they say that there's concern. Does this person?
But in the life of Rabbi here, there was never somebody who could afford to give him a gift with an open heart.
Well, the point is, he was extremely careful. He was the extreme example of that. He said, if I remember correctly, he said from 5 years old, okay, he never took from another person's shulchan. Until 5 years old, he took from at 5 years old, which is the cutoff age for children in terms of parental obligations. So he was independent. The point is, he was the extreme example. You find this in Chazal, that there is a certain value, and there was always a certain person. There may be a certain person who followed this value to the extreme, and he was noted to be very careful about this specific value, and he was machmir in that value. So Pinchas ben Yair was known to be machmir in this value. When you get to halacha, yeah, that these are you're more concerned, like in our behavior, that you have to be more considerate of the fact that there's other considerations. The person wants to give to you and stuff like that, but he was considered the extreme.
It's a side point, but it's hard to believe.
What?
Where did he get his shoes when he was 7 years old? His pants.
Yeah, that's another issue. The fact of the matter is that in that society, it does seem that children did take care of this. There's a whole thing where it says a parent really only has an obligation to support a child until the age of 5. That seems to be the halachic cutoff. An absolute obligation to support a child. Where Moshe though says that in our society it's much later, because that was in that society. In our society, a person becomes independent much later. So it has something to do with historical context as well. Okay, so
I don't want to get you off track.
No, it's just it's important. But the thing is that with a lot of aspects of a value in Torah, it comes out that a lot of times there's a certain Tana who's extremely careful about something. He's machmir a certain thing, and he's respected for his own chumrah in the sense that this is something he's taken upon himself. But the other Tanaim obviously didn't follow it. I mean, another one that comes to mind, I forget who it was, but there was someone who was very makbid that he was never misyachid with an animal, because the prohibition of bestiality is one of the arayas. A strange type of arayas and so forth and so forth. There's some of the categories, but it's one of the, it's in that category of arayas. And I mean, it's a different type of rights for other reasons, but the fact of the matter is that most people say yichud doesn't apply to an animal, but he was machmir. He wasn't saying this is the law. He was machmir. He was never alone with an animal. Okay, but that was his chumrah for whatever reason. And there's certain people who take on chumras. Doesn't mean everyone else has to take it on. They have their reasons for taking on. Everyone has their own particular derech and Torah or whatever, but the point is that was Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, and a person who takes on a thing, it becomes the model of what that value is about. Not the model in the sense we have to follow it, but he's a flag bearer of that value. Right. There's such a thing. So what's mentioned about that is really the sense that you should want to cover yourself. You should want to say, hey, listen, I'm benefiting, I should cover my weight. You know what I mean? That's it, and that's the motivation. Like, if you're in a shul, right? You should want to say, hey, I want to cover my weight. I want to pay for what I can. That's there. We're going to talk about it a little bit, how you make cheshbonos like that. But the fact is that in so many ways, I see it all the time. People, well, it's not costing you anything, so what's the difference? But you should cover, what about your ideas? Cover your weight. Now, obviously, some people can't cover their weight, and that's where you get into issues of doing a chesed for someone who can't cover their weight. So you're helping them out. That's tzedakah. That's chesed and so forth. But the point is that when I'm talking about from my perspective, why should I have this idea of covering your weight? There's actually a halacha in the question of shame. Shame is one of the methods of damages we talk about. This when an animal eats something, right? Okay, it means an animal. It's one of the damage categories is from an animal. But an animal is actually following through on a drive. So the animal is eating because animals eat. So if an animal is in a public place back then, you brought your animal into the marketplace, and an animal started eating someone else's, the food vendor. Animal went over, started eating it. So in halacha, in a public place, a person should recognize there's going to be animals. The responsibility is on the person who's bringing his private goods into the public place to know that they're animals. Not that the person who's taking care of the animals has no sense of, hey, just hefker, you take care of the animals. But the fact is, if an animal starts eating something, it's actually the person who brought the good into the public place that is a little bit more, has the first responsibility. So the fact is, they say, if an animal starts eating someone's goods in the public place, let's say a person brings in wheat, and an animal starts eating the wheat, so the person is potter, but he has to pay for what he benefited from. That animal has to be fed, and you would go home and feed that animal. You would feed him oats, right? Now he was in the public fair and he started eating apples. Oats are much cheaper than apples, so you don't have to pay for the apples, but you have to pay for what he benefited in terms of not having to give him his supper of oats that night. That's a similar idea of covering your weight, being involved in covering your weight. So that's one of the things I was trying to bring out from my idea that a different perspective. It's not always chesed. It's not always. Sometimes you're putting things into things, like you think in terms of shuls and schools, a lot of things of that nature, because you have to you're benefiting from this, so you cover your weight. It's very interesting. I once said to someone that in many ways, when we look at what we call tzedakah, so it sounds like charity, which is not a good translation, or we're looking at the generic terms of what we know about, it's almost like we have a sense of being a government. We have to think like a government. A government, in the sense of, am I covering my weight? Am I doing what has to be done? So forth and so forth. It's more than just be a nice guy. It's looking to see what I can do, what's my responsibilities. So that's one aspect. Another aspect that came out of I think the last few weeks is the concept of community, in the sense that, and it's an extension of this, a lot of things that happen within the community, it's that you're not really giving to someone else like a chesed, but what you're doing is you're looking upon the community as having obligations, and the fact is that you give to the community because that's the way to fulfill the responsibilities that you have for your own Torah necessities. The two perspectives of that, two types of obligations. One is when you have your own independent obligation, but it's necessary for the community to create a communal entity to allow you to meet your own individual responsibilities, like a mikveh. Okay? How many people can build a mikveh? Well, if you're a real community, you can build a mikveh. If you're very wealthy, you can build a mikveh. But every community is supposed to have a mikveh. The point is that in having a mikveh, you are allowing individuals to fulfill their mitzvah, their following of the mitzvahs of Taras Mishpacha, of the laws of Nida. The point is that you have to recognize when you give to the mikvah, you're not doing chesed. You have, especially if you're someone who uses the mikvah, you need a mikvah the same way you need a kiddush cup for Shabbos.
You're paying for a service.
But you're paying for something that you need, right? In the sense that the same way I have to buy a kiddush cup to make kiddush, I gotta buy wine to make kiddush, right? I have to construct a mikvah so I can be able to table, right? Just that it has to be done by me forming a group of people because I can't afford to buy it by myself. That's one type of communal obligation where individuals need the community to purchase something in order for people to be able to meet their obligations. That's one type of community. There's another type of obligation community where the community as an entity has an obligation. It's the obligation of the community, not because everyone in the community has an individual thing, but the community as a almost a gestalt, a unique, a different entity. Like the community needs something. It needs something as a communal entity. Let me give you an example like that. In certain ways, you see, the truth is that applies in a certain sense to things which have some individual benefit for certain people, but the community as a whole still has to have it. Let's say a melamed tinokus, a person who teaches elementary school, cheder, right? So you don't have any kids anymore at cheder age. You're not benefiting from cheder anymore, but as a member of the community needs a cheder, okay? And therefore, you have an obligation as a member of the community to ensure that the community has a cheder. It's not just a chesed, that's me fulfilling my obligation as a member of the community. So there's this aspect where I as an individual have to get together with the community in order to be able to purchase that which is necessary for me to fulfill my own individual obligation. And then there is that which is me as a member of the community has to fulfill the community obligation on a Kal B'Yisrael, on a Jewish congregation, to have certain items, certain things. And even if you don't personally, individually need that item, or you need, or there are certain things as a collective, you need that item. Let's say, like, for example that might be the bringing of the Talmidim in the Beis Hamikdash. The Klal Yisrael in the Beis Hamikdash, they had to bring a Talmid in the morning and the afternoon. They bring karbanos, right? The community had that obligation, right? No individual in the community, but you as a member of the community have to contribute to be part of the communal, meeting the communal obligation. So this is really the mitzvah shkolim, which is actually give a chatzi shekel, which is applicable to this week because this Shabbos is partial shkolim. But the fact of the matter is, when you gave your chatzi shekel, you weren't doing tzedakah. It wasn't a chesed. You had an obligation to give a chatzi shekel, and this money was used to purchase the tamidim, the korbanos for the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, and I, as a member of the community, have to be involved with this. Okay, it's my responsibility. So it's a different type of issue. So there's these different types of considerations. That it's not everything is a chesed. It's that things are carrying your own weight and accepting all your responsibilities. And the issue exists, and I can say it, like, for example, when you buy yourself a kiddush cup, you're not doing a chesed, but it's a mitzvah. You buy yourself a lulav and esrog. More specific. That's a real chesed shel mitzvah. You buy yourself a lulav and esrog, right? It's not a chesed, but it's a mitzvah consumption. It's a mitzvah. It's our expenditure. We have to do that. But the point is that. But then there are communities, like back in Europe, right? They can only get, they were lucky if they were able to get a lulav and esrog for the whole community. So community had to get a lulav and esrog, right? And the idea was everyone should share in, or as a community they bought the lulav and esrog, and therefore everyone owned it. But the point is that that's not if you paid if you gave in to the fund that bought the lulav and esrog for your shul, you weren't doing a chesed. You were contributing to your obligation to fulfill the community idea of buying a lulav and esrog, so people can do the mitzvah.
When you, in a situation of lulav and esrog, or a building fund, for sure, something like that.
Right.
So you're fulfilling an obligation.
Right.
And it's not tzedakah, it's not charity in the sense that we were talking about.
Right.
Does that give you an entitlement in terms of that lulav and esrog that you would not otherwise have, or in terms of the building fund that you would not otherwise have?
If you don't contribute to lulav and esrog, then you have an interesting issue, because you have to contribute. It's not yours.
So on day one, you don't have a lulav and esrog.
If you have to come into that shul and you say, hey, there's a community lulav and esrog belonging to the shul, but you have no shaykhs to the shul. You're not involved. If you're a member of the shul and you give money to the shul, and the shul takes some money and buys it, if you as a member of the shul, then you can be involved in the ownership of that lulav and esrog as a partner with the other people who gave to the shul. But if you have to walk into the shul, you have no bias over that esrog. You have no bias over that lulav and esrog. So that's an example. But what you're getting to is an interesting question. The question then arises, okay, so there are communal obligations, but the question arises is how do you determine what should be the appropriate amount given for every person towards that communal obligation? And here we see that Meforshim deal with three criteria, and they don't apply the three criteria universally, but they apply the three criteria as a basic fundamental issues that have to be discussed, and a balancing between them, 2 out of 3, 1 out of 3, when do you apply this one, when do you apply that one. See, by shkalim you only have one criteria. Everyone for the korban tamid had to give chatzi shekel. That was a head count. Okay, if you're poor you couldn't live that. If you're rich you can't give more. Every person chatzi shekel. That's it. Specific amount. That's a head count. Okay, so there are people.
Can you borrow from somebody else the chatzi shekel that you're going to donate?
If you borrow from the person.
Let's say you don't have your half shekel.
So you're gonna.
So you go to Shmuel and say, "Can I borrow a half shekel from you?"
Yeah, because it's like money. It's like,
so that at that point that you make the contribution, it's yours that you're making.
When you borrow money, right? Afterwards, you can use the money to purchase things, right? Okay, but you just have a chayv to give the guy chatzi shekel. Right. As long as you see it as money. If you're borrowing with no intention to return it, then
that's called theft.
That's something different. The fact is, so one of the ideas of the head count by shkalim was only a head count. So that's some people have to say about is applicable, in that every member of a shul has to give something. But they say there's other criteria as well. The second criteria is a question of usage. In other words, there is some argument for mikvah that while every member of a community should contribute to the mikvah, people in the age group that are actually using the mikvah should contribute a little bit extra. That's why one of the things that happens with most mikvahs is that the person actually comes to use the mikvah pays something, right?
The user fee.
The user fee, and that says, hey, listen, in terms of this amount to be paid for this communal entity, right? There's a user fee. Does the user fee actually cover the whole amount of the mikvah? No, right? Maybe there's mikvot that make money user fees. I don't know, but the fact of the matter is that it's not that the mikvah is totally upheld by user fees, but the fact is that use is one criteria. So, by the way, there's playing with this. What is this criteria? What is that criteria? But one criteria is head count. One criteria is use, and third criteria is wealth. Okay, that in terms of, let's say, building a shul, that the amount of contribution, let's talk in terms of building fund, should be determined. One of the factors should be the wealth of individuals. And wealthy individuals should give more to the communal necessity to have a shul. And the question arises, why is this so? So one argument is because of the concept of hidden mitzvah. Because the truth is, one argument is that there's a basic bottom line meaning of the criteria, right? But usually when you start getting into building a shul, the classic example is when you get a chazan for Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. So the shul's talking when you get a chazan for Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, people wanted a better chazan, right? One that his voice sounds good, right? There's some halachic arguments that you should have one that his voice sounds good. So the point is that that's true. Then, but the point is, the guy who's really poor says, listen, I'd like to have a guy with a better voice, but I can't afford it. Well, the rich guy says, hey, I'd like to have Kluzinski. So the point is, and there's an Indian of a mitzvah that might be for his own personal interest. He likes music, but on the other hand, there is an idea that the person who's a chazan should have a good voice, so forth and so forth. So they say, well, wealth will make a distinction in how you want to satisfy this communal mitzvah. So therefore, there is a criteria that says that the distinction should be based upon wealth. That's one argument. There's another argument that just basically says that wealth is an aspect of you being a responsible citizen of the community, and your wealth may increase your responsibilities, just simply like progressive taxation in a country. You know,
isn't there a sense that a wealthy person that he has to credit a portion of his success to Ribono Shel Olam?
That may be so, but the fact is,
in which case that would increase his debt to the process.
That's between him and the Kodesh Baruch Hu. The point is, we're trying to come up with definite definitions of his responsibility as a member of the community. It might be that as a member of the community, the fact that you've been successful, should make you recognize the Kodesh Baruch Hu's involvement, and you should recognize that it increase your responsibility as a member of the community. But the point is an aspect of being a member of the community is your wealth is a factor in how you carry your weight within a community.
So you can be assessed based on your wealth by let's say by the shul.
Oh, okay. Yes. So the fact is that's it. Now, in addition to this, what about a person who says, I want to make a donation beyond my responsibilities, right? Beyond my assessment? Okay, that's getting into chesed category. You know what I mean? And we'll see what category it gets into. We're just talking about the basic categories.
Right.
If a person wants to say, listen, I know that there's I want to help out people who can't afford to cover their responsibility or cover their responsibilities onerous on them. So,
but very often, rather than assess people a higher rate, it seems to me Jewish organizations very often take this into account and set the base rate much higher than people are going to pay.
Right.
And in so doing, the few people who have a lot of money pay the going rate. And rather than be assessed a higher rate, they pay the going rate, and everybody else ends up being to some degree supported by
a lot of schools
because they pay a lower rate.
Well, what a lot of schools try to do is they set the see, now you're getting into issues, how do you assess and stuff like that. The point is when they create the assessment, what criteria do they use for creating the assessment?
What I'm saying is, if a shul says membership costs $10,000 to our shul a year, $10,000 a year, right?
Right.
But we also have a policy that nobody will be turned away because they don't have enough money.
Right.
In saying that, you're saying that membership really isn't $10,000 a year. Ooh. It's only $10,000 a year for those who have a lot of money.
Okay, you're right, and that is legitimate in terms of a shul. What they're saying is that we're going to set a certain figure, which is the starting point, And then, in order to figure out what you should give, I think there's an assumption that um, you can, if you leave it that there's a base amount and then you can add on to it, how many people add on to it? So you set the base amount higher, and then you say, okay, if you want it to be lower, you have to show us what the lower is. The truth is this is all part of the problem, in the sense that how many times do people try and get away with less and so forth? I mean, the fact is that one of the big problems about all this is the fact that we live in a very difficult assessment environment. When you lived in Europe, say before the 1800s, there was an independent Jewish community, and people in that community were assessed, and it was a taxation, right? And then you had to, were taxed, and in fact, even if a wealthy person was given a tax, and it could be like even a certain amount for the Gabbai Tzedakah for helping out people who are poor, like a social service tax. And if you didn't give it, then they could send someone in to go take stuff out of your house because they were the government. Okay? The point is, we live in a world where we don't have that type of assessment. Everyone's got to assess themselves. And in that regard, this is part of the problem. People don't think in terms of this sense of responsibility, this sense of covering the weight. Now, the truth is then you get into issues, well, who makes the decisions of what should be happening in a shul? Should a shul spend a lot of money on aesthetics, for example? Okay, or maybe people say, listen, I don't want to have that kind of that nicer shul. I'd rather have them because it's too expensive for me. Then the wealthy people get involved. Well, no, we should have a nice shul. There's a Keli Vandehu. There's an idea of making a nice shul. Okay, so that's where you get into the balancing of this issue. That's really what's underlying this issue. How do you make those different types of decisions? Now, the truth is, if we thought that way, and people thought in terms of it's carrying my weight as I should carry my weight, okay, in terms of how I use it, in terms of head thing, in terms of a lot of these things, then it'll be a different type of mitzvah connotation. But this isn't brought up. People, when they think in terms of membership, they don't think in terms of, hey, I have a lot of responsibility to cover my weight. Now, wait a second. The shul's making certain decisions. I'm not totally in line with those decisions. I can't afford those decisions. Okay, how should that work out? Well, because there's a certain percentage of shul of people who are very wealthy, and they're the ones who are making decisions. And the truth is that there is a concept in halacha that people who are giving more should have a little bit more of a voice. Okay, but on the other hand, not a total voice. And you have to take these things into account. Therefore, you have to say, hey, then you have to battle and say, wait a second, 53% of the shul would take bare bones, right? In the chazan idea, 73% want whatever chazan you get. We don't care about his voice. We just need a chazan, and we can't afford anything more. And 37% says we want Kuzovitsky. Well, then when you figure out, you might say, hey, listen, right? There's a certain base amount that everyone's got to pay equally. In terms of Kuzovitsky, okay, those people who wanted Kuzovitsky, they have to cover the cost of Kuzovitsky. Oh, but other guys are getting some benefit of Kuzovitsky also. Okay, so maybe you have it that the base amount is a little bit more because you are getting from it, but maybe certain people will be really much against that. They can't afford it. It gets much more complicated. But the guy who gives a lot of money to a shul, instead doing a chesed, I'm not taking away from the fact that he's doing a chesed. There may be a chesed like this. He may be carrying more than his obligation from the perception of covering his weight. He may be doing more than covering his weight. Okay? Based upon the criteria of head count, usage, and wealth. Okay? But the fact is that it can't be that every time you give a donation to the shul, you think of it as I'm giving charity. It's your shul. Benefit from it. You're benefiting from it, don't you carry away? And then you have other people. You hear stories of a person, because the only time that they're really careful on membership, that they actually check to see if the ticket is Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. So a guy is away Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, and then he doesn't. He comes to davens the whole year there, the rest of the time in the shul. right? But because he's away Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, he doesn't feel the obligation because of the way it's structured. Wait a second. It might be a big bulk tzedakah, but you don't even see it that way. You have obligations. What I'm getting at is a very different methodology of looking at things, and with this type of perspective. It's much more complicated because you have to balance out what is really my obligation. You have to take in this balancing between the three criteria that I mentioned and so forth. Before we go back and forth in this, there's a Ramosha, let's say by mikvah, he believes one of the criteria should be usage, but he's very hard pressed to say that if someone doesn't want to give anything to mikvah, you should not let that woman in. He's not willing to go that far. You know what I mean?
It seems to me that it raises another issue, is that in a situation where you're talking about a chazan, so 70% of the shul is happy with your average chazan.
Right.
30% want a star.
Right.
And they're willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
That 30%, they say,
yeah,
we're going to double our dues so that we can get this chazan.
Right.
Right. That's our position.
Right.
And by the way, most of you are only paying half the dues anyway, than the other 70%.
Well,
right?
but
But we're going to do that. The 70% may very well have a position that we don't want to be beholden to you for this. Right? We don't want to spend the money on a chazan, even if it's your extra money, because at the end of the day, we're now beholden to you, and that's not how we structure it. Or the other possibility is to say that you should belong to a shul in which you are at the same economic bracket as the other members are.
The fact is that the truth is in a community. You have to think, you see, that's one of the problems again. We're dealing with shuls. We're not dealing with, halachically, when you look at halachically, they're talking about communities. If you were in Pinsk, there was a community in Pinsk.
Right.
And there were poor people and there was rich people in the community, and they had one shul for the Pinsk.
Right, so there you had the whole bell curve of wealth.
Right. The fact is that these are criteria. In terms of being beholden, yes. But on the other hand, these individuals, it's not that they want to have a chandelier in the vestry room, because they like chandeliers. There's an inyan of getting a good chazan for Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, either because there's an inyan of the person davening having a very good voice. There's an inyan of Zak Keli Van Behu, of beautifying God. So the fact of the matter is the person wants to do something really nice. Okay, so the point is that's where you get into issues of balancing out. And is there an aspect of being beholden? On the other hand, if you come to shul and you have a Kuzovitsky doing shul, say you like Chazanim, right? And actually, listen, I would never have spent for this, but in the end, my Rosh Hashanah and Kippur davening was much better because there was such a good Chazan. So that's a consideration also. So there's a certain aspect of being Makir Tov and saying, listen, I can never afford this. You gave it, but you didn't do it else chesed. You did it all your communal obligation, in the sense that you felt that and there would be a community decision to get that chazan. It still has to be a community decision, and the
right.
balancing of that community decision in terms of taking into account all these factors.
So the community could say, as a group, look, it's nice that you made the offer, but it's making people uncomfortable. We're not going to do it.
I think possibly. I think possibly they could do that. The fact of the matter is that they might say, listen.
What is the nature, the democratic or lack of democratic nature of where you've got 70% of the people who contribute 20% of the revenue to the shul?
That's another issue. And
30% contribute 80%.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is that there again you have the same criteria. There's an aspect of head count. There's an aspect of wealth having some right. In halacha, we do recognize the gvir has certain greater rights. Obviously, the Talmid Chacham has the most rights. So the Rav has the most say. Right. But in any institution, but there has to be some kind of balance. It's not. It's what you're asking about, and the truth is, it's a much more complex issue than we can get into. Get into this in this share, although it really touches upon it, is the very idea of communal structure. See, the point is we don't have communities anymore. There's a couple of exceptions maybe in the world, but the fact of the matter is we have membership to shul and so forth and so forth. But you don't go to a community where there's a communal government that tells you these are your taxes. You know what I mean? It's a very different situation where if you don't want to be part of this community, you go somewhere else. You're like this shul, no, that shul over there. Really?
Right.
And okay, the point is that changes the whole perspective. There's much more autonomy in our world today. Therefore, let's say this concept of Sona Matanos Yechia, back in Europe in 1642, the community say, hey, pay your bill, right? You don't have
So
to
if you're living in Pensk, it didn't matter which ABCD shul you went to.
Well,
your responsibility to the community would be determined by.
Yeah, I think there was one
the communal organization.
There may be 4 separate communities based upon around the shuls, but in each community there was a communal structure. Okay, it wasn't that you had the option, of autonomy. See, in our world today, what happens is, and this is a somewhat of a difference, is that the reason I start off with Sona Matanos Yechia, or the idea of covering your own weight, is because there's no authority that's telling you what you have to do. So you have to look at your own responsibilities, al pi halacha, for what you have to do, and then, in addition to that, and we'll get into this in terms of other mitzvot, you have to recognize that sometimes for what you give, it's not you're doing a chesed, is you're voting for the type of community that you want. So the point is, if you have different shuls, one has a Kuzovitsky and the other one doesn't have has less, and so forth. So they put their extra money into daycare or whatever it is, a better daycare teacher, a better cheder Rabbi, and this one puts more money into the chazan and stuff like that, right? You then say, listen, I want to be a member of this community because I like the values that's going on, and you're willing to share with them. It's the point is that it's obviously a much more complex issue than I can deal with tonight in terms of how you balance democracy with based upon those criteria. But the point is to understand that it's not just about every time you give money to a shul, every time you give money to it's a chesed. It's you have a responsibility to pay for your mitzvah use, a responsibility to do mitzvahs. And you need a shul, you need a mikvah, you need a school. And it's not just yours, you need it for to exist in the community. So if you're 73, right, the younger people in the community still need a mikvah. Okay? And you as a member of that community have a responsibility. You're not doing a chesed, you are acting as a member of that community.